You've heard AM, you've heard FM. Now, tune into DM Radio, the world's longest running show about data. Each week, host Eric Kavanaugh interviews the brightest minds in the world of information management. Want to be on a show? Send an email to info@dmradio.biz. Now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Okay. Well, clearly I am not Eric. I am Danielle Oberdier from Dikayo Data, and I work with Eric a lot, so I'm sitting in for him today, and I'm really excited. And I have Dylan with me from Sleuth. He's the founder, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about Sleuth, and then we'll get into the more nitty-gritty of teamwork and how software can help and how, we can build better teams.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here. And as you say, my name is Dylan Etkin. I'm co-founder and CEO at Sleuth. Over at Sleuth, we build a Dora metrics tracker. And if we're talking about collaboration and efficiency, I think what we do is right in line with that. So we're helping teams be their best selves and find their bottlenecks and understand that they can have very easy to use tools in order to improve their development flow and process.
Cool. And do you find that technical teams, because I know you have an engineering background, do you find that technical teams have their own challenges to manage as compared to teams that aren't working with tech and software?
Oh, absolutely. Because engineering is it's a little bit of art and it's a little bit of science, especially software engineering. And, there's a set of tools that we kind of all have to deal with. And so there's like quite a bit of tooling space in terms of collaboration, but then, there's the human side of things too. And understanding, are we building the right things? Are we communicating to stakeholders properly? Are we communicating with each other properly? Especially when, it's technical and you're trying to get like complex ideas across. That can, I think there's challenges in there that are not found in, say, other sorts of teams.
I agree with that. I feel like also tech people have a little bit of a higher standard than other teams because there definitely not healthcare, but there's a lot of risk there. But I find that, with tech, there just comes more risks in terms of what you're building and, what you're taking on. Because I know a little bit about your background, how does being a founder and managing Sleuth differ from your other previous work on teams?
Yeah, well, I guess to give the audience a little more context, I spent a lot of time at Atlassian. I was lucky enough to be a part of that organization when it was very small and watch it grow to quite a large size. I think now they're at like 10,000 or something. But when I left about 3 and a bit years ago, I think we were at like 5,000 at the time. And so obviously one big difference at Sleuth is we're smaller. And also, building something from nothing, going from that 0 to 1, and then scaling 1 to a much larger degree is a very different experience than someplace that has found a ton of traction. And now you're just trying to serve larger and larger organizations and sort of tie into bigger and bigger use cases inside of organizations. So very different, also very different to be a founder because you get to, worry about everything, which is kind of cool. That proverb of be careful what you wish for, you might just get it, is accurate, right? Like you get to learn a little bit about sales, you get to learn a little bit about marketing, you get to learn a little bit about product market fit or a lot about product market fit. Engineering, product, you name it, the entire gamut, learn what it is to properly do customer success. All of this is kind of, your responsibility at the end of the day. And so very different than being an engineering manager or somebody in charge of a team inside of a larger organization.
I never realized how technical customer success was until I interviewed Plotly's manager of customer success, and they just won the Stevie Awards for that. It's just a big award for people who are doing, I think it's just all around business, but this was for customer success. And I'm just like, hey, like, I just think of it as like communicating and like using soft skills, but there's actually just a ton of like technical support and internal systems that are taking place. So I'd love for you to tell me a little bit about how you're deploying your own technical systems internally, and what Sleuth plans to contribute to the overall tech ecosystem.
Yeah, for sure. And before I jump on that, I'll just mention about the customer success side of things. You're absolutely right. I mean, it's a function that is so cross-cutting within the organization. We have it reporting directly to the CEO, to myself, and simply because cutting through red tape or making sure that you're bringing together, or actually fostering collaboration between all of the different elements of your organization, and that's across sales and marketing, and like you say, support. Support might need to be bringing in engineering, have product questions, or prioritize product initiatives. I mean, it's crazy what it takes to be successful with customer success. And just even learning from our perspective, the difference between what a self-serve customer can do for themselves and then what an enterprise customer, like what their needs are, is pretty dramatic.
I agree with that. You'd mentioned to me that you are trying to improve efficiency in the tech industry between teams. So I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about that. After the break, we'll get into the more like developer side of things, but just an overview.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's really what we're all about, right? So, we are a Dora metrics tracker, and we provide a lot of tools to improve. For those that don't know, Dora metrics kind of grew out from these state of DevOps reports that were starting roughly, I think, around 2010 or maybe a little afterwards. The industry as a whole has gone through quite a shift over the last 10 or 13 years, where this idea of DevOps and DevOps practitioners has become pretty widespread, and a lot of teams have moved from a more waterfall model, or where they're deploying maybe once a quarter and shipping behind the firewall, to SaaS based and trying to deploy things as early as they can and as often as they can. And in that way of working, there are some key metrics that these reports have sort of called out. And there's like these 4 key metrics that are the Dora metrics. And they're pretty simple things, honestly. Like, they're not overly technical. Sorry, my cat's like trying to walk in frame here. She likes the warmth of the laptop. But they're not things that would be crazy. It's like frequency of deploy, what they call change lead time, which is like from your first code commit through to actually shipping something into production. It's your change failure rate. So in other words, how often are you sending things out into the world and they're not landing in the way that you wanted them to? And then the kind of sister metric to that, where it's called mean time to recovery, which is when you have failed, how long does it take you to get back into a positive state?
So you're speaking data science language right now, and I just love it.
Yeah.
There's always more metrics you can add to everything.
Well, the problem with the idea of trying to track efficiency for software engineering in the past was there were too many metrics, and they didn't necessarily correlate to real world things. So for instance, like organizational performance, and that's kind of the real differentiator with the Dora metrics versus things of the past, like lines of code or number of pull requests or developer burnout. These were sort of squishy things that were really hard to quantify and put like a hard measure to. And there was a sense that they had an impact on how you were doing overall, but there wasn't a direct correlation. Whereas with these Dora metrics, they've done like tons of studies and seen that there is a direct correlation to teams falling into different categories and improving on these and being able to make efficiency gains for the overall organization's goals.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thing to contribute, because I still feel like people are struggling with incorporating technology into their day-to-day operations. I mean, that's just what I've observed. And I think, like, down the chain of command, there has to be such good communication, but departments have, for whatever reason, developed into silos, and sometimes that communication doesn't happen organically, and that can be difficult. I know that you have a smaller team right now, and you're working remote, so I think probably that makes it easier for communication, but there are challenges to both, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I think remote does really it adds its own challenges to communication. And honestly, once you get past like 3 or 4 people working on a thing, the edges become enough such that you do have to tackle a lot of these problems. We took our organization after raising a Series A about a year and a bit ago. We grew from about like 10 to almost 35, 40 people. And we knew, just because it wasn't our first rodeo, that meant that there was a lot of growth that was going to have to happen within the organization. And that was going to slow us down for a certain amount of time, right? Like adding in basically some layers of management and adding in those like layers of communication that end up being, friction points, and coming up with a good process to make sure that all of those things were working really well was going to take a little bit of time and practice. But we also knew that, if we solve it for 40, we're probably pretty good until we hit about 150 or 200, right? Because
Is that where you're trying to go?
Quite well.
Are
Is
you
that
trying
where
to
we're going to go? Of course.
Yeah, of course. I love that.
Of
I love
course.
that answer. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't have experience myself with getting Series A or anything, but I do, talk to companies about it and see kind of I find that there are a lot of companies all over the spectrum of funding that are making a huge difference in like niche tech spaces. Like there's so many companies focused on data warehousing, then there's ELT, ETL.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's who I see a lot of at conferences, are people who are talking about ELT and ETL, and I love talking about that, so that always makes my day. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think like also with remote teams, since I mentioned conferences, I've noticed that a lot of people get to meet and actually communicate face to face at conferences when they haven't before, even though they're talking every day remotely.
Oh yeah, it's huge. The face-to-face is still absolutely huge, even in a fully remote organization like our own. We make sure that each department gets to meet at least every 6 months, and then we get the entire organization together once a year. We're actually all heading to Mexico City at the end of May, because we have folks in Europe and we have folks in the US, and we kind of just pick somewhere slightly neutral, a little closer to one side or the other. But that FaceTime is invaluable, really. Like when we did it last year, that was the first time we all got to meet after the pandemic had sort of cooled down enough that we all felt comfortable, and we didn't feel like it was irresponsible as as stewards of the business to ask people to make that trip. And it was incredible. Like some of us have been working together for a little over 2 years, and hadn't even met some of the folks that we'd all been working together with, and we just came away with so much more energy and alignment. And it's definitely something that we invest in.
That sounds so exciting. Mexico City is on my list. I haven't been.
Same. I'm excited. I think it'll be fun.
I've heard really good things. A lot of people, it's easy to get there from New Orleans, where I live. So a lot of people I know have gone on a vacation there and loved it. So it's on my list. I actually haven't been to any part of Mexico, which is strange because I've traveled the world, and but you always have more to go to. Greece is my favorite. That's my top of the list because
That's actually where we went last year. Interestingly, our first offsite was in Athens, and
oh,
that was great. It was beautiful there.
where there's so many dips at the functions and things.
Absolutely. And also we had lucked into, or not lucked into, my COO worked really hard to put together a great trip and found this hotel that had this rooftop bar that had a view of the Acropolis. And, so we could just kind of like lounge around and do our work stuff, in an environment where we could have a drink and have a lunch. And then you get this background of the Acropolis, which, feels pretty good.
Yeah,
Nothing wrong with that.
I think like it's so nice to put so much effort into those team bonding exercises, and like when you're remote, it's so like it's always special. So I think people really enjoy that more than if they're like 9 to 5 every day and then have to add stuff on top of that. But this
Right.
sounds amazing. Like I just love to think of how you choose the places. It's like the Olympics,
Yeah, no, that one's that one's a little tricky. But
You
I
take a
guess if we
poll.
bring it back to collaboration,
Yes.
right? It's about building those bonds between the different people inside of the organization, and giving yourself the time to have conversations that need to evolve over time. Like one of the things that I think we struggle with or can be difficult is that Zoom is one of these things where you get together for a purpose, for a set amount of time, right? And you're trying to get through a very specific agenda. And what it's good, it can be very useful, and we get most of our stuff done that way. But there is this sort of getting to know somebody, starting a conversation, and then a couple hours later being like, I thought about that a little bit, or did you ever think about this other thing? And then you get to the meat of something, or the important part, and making sure that you have those touch points in terms of collaborations. So when things are a little harder or a little easier or whatever, you have those bonds built so that you can work through them well.
Yes. And well, during after the break, we're going to talk more about the developer side of building Sleuth, and kind of also I want to talk about data collection. It came to my mind again when I was thinking about y'all choosing where you go on your trips. So like, do you take surveys, So I'm curious how your data collection works, because we were talking about those metrics, and we will come back after the break. You're listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Okay, welcome back to DM Radio. And since we've been on break, we acquired a new guest who has been on the show before, Harold Sinnott. And so that'll be nice for us to kind of go back and forth, make it a group discussion. Harold, do you want to introduce yourself briefly before we get into the nitty-gritty of teamwork again?
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And sorry for the technical issues that I am experiencing today, that we are experiencing, because apparently I had the broken link. But fortunately, I am here, Danielle, and thank you for welcoming me to the show today. I'm very glad to be here again. My name is Harold Sinnott. I am a digital consultant. I am a digital consultant and social media, also technology influencer. And when I'm here, usually what I do is I work with companies, with big brands, to help them tell their stories about what they're doing in terms of technology, particularly with emerging technologies, the future of work, and digital transformation. And I work with a lot of telecommunication companies, and software companies, helping to amplify their voice in the global social media environment.
Yes, I know. I actually told Dylan Etkin of Sleuth, who's here, so you guys can meet. I told him that you are a social media aficionado, and it's very, very true. But maybe you can help me interview Dylan because he is working on improving efficiency for teams. Oh, there's your video and the future of work.
Oh, yeah.
We're all good. And before the break, we had talked about getting into more of like the nitty-gritty of how to develop good teams from an actual technical developer standpoint, and what software you use. So, Dylan, I'm going to let you take it away and tell me a bit about what that process looks like from a developer standpoint.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of, obviously, there's an insane amount of variety, but I think that there are some primitives that most high-performing engineering teams are working with nowadays. And these are things that, provide real value that people pay into in terms of the work that they're doing and the investments that they're making daily, and are kind of the key pieces towards, building software engineering products in this day and age. And so some of these things are things like your source code repository system, and that's going to be like a GitHub, GitLab, Azure, or a Bitbucket. And that's going to come with, this idea of pull requests or merge requests, which is this idea of code review, which has become pretty standard. If you're not doing code review, you probably want to be, and that's a capability, that's a primitive that we see almost every team using. And that's going to be Git, behind the scenes. Also, you're going to find things like an issue tracker. That's going to be like your Jira or your Shortcut or your Linear or one of those tools out there, right? But the idea is that you're capturing what the work is that you're going to do. You're, liaising with product. You're talking a little bit about maybe you're going back and forth with customers, and you're capturing the kind of the inception of the thing, and then also tracking how that flows in terms of getting prioritized and scheduled and those sorts of things. Another primitive that you've got are your CI/CD systems. So, you've got this code, you've got people working on something. How do you take that from I'm ready to now it's in customers' hands, right? And this tends to be your Circle CIs, your GitHub Actions, Azure pipelines. There's any number of things out there that do these sort of primitive behaviors. And then, the last one I'll sort of talk about, and then I'll open it up to the rest of us, is this idea of like monitoring, the have I done a good job? Have I done a good thing? Have I messed everything up? And this, runs the gamut of like your kind of incident management with something like PagerDuty to, metric systems that are like automated checks on software, things like your Datadogs or your New Relics or those sorts of things. And we find that, most modern teams are going to have some form of these toolings in place to support like developers being able to go all the way from concept through to launch.
That makes sense. I find that a lot of times, I told you this before the show, that I find it so interesting that some teams use their own software internally and then also are providing it to customers. And I think that that's an interesting duality there because, you're moving it down the pipeline to like all these different people, but then also using it internally. So when I interview people, I normally ask about kind of the differences between using it internally and, serving it to the customer. And Dylan, I'll have you go first, and then I know that Harold has some insight on this, so you can go next.
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree more. Honestly, like I've been fortunate enough to sort of spend my career on developer tools, right? Like at Atlassian, that was Jira, and Bitbucket, and with Sleuth, that's Sleuth itself. And you're absolutely right that when you're targeting a market like developers, scratching your own itch is very often a good proxy for whether the market will enjoy what it is that you're building. So, we endeavor to be the very best consumer of Sleuth. We actually make our work public. So like you can go to our website and there's a live demo link, and that's us building Sleuth in Sleuth, right? Because we want people to see the value that we're getting out of the product, so that they can understand and translate that to the value that they'll be getting out of it. But also, I mean, you catch things and you do something and you try and use it and you ask yourself, did that land? You know what I mean? Like, why aren't we using that as much as we thought we were going to use that? And that it can often be like a great way of getting in front of that rather than having to learn that from your customers.
Yeah, I love what you said about you want to be the best Sleuth customer ever. Like that wasn't your words. You said it more eloquently. But that makes sense in terms of like, I feel like every company feels that way, and I will be going to look at the live demo for sure. Building Sleuth in Sleuth.
Yeah, it's a little bit meta, but it's definitely useful. I mean, I've worked on products. I worked once at some place that did DNS, and I'll tell you, you don't change DNS that often unless you're doing something really weird. And so it was a struggle, right? We didn't know how to bake into the day-to-day the things that we're doing. But, with something like Sleuth, we have Slack-based approvals, and we do that for every promotion from staging to production, right? We have alarms set up based off of whether we are failing too frequently and those sorts of things, right? Like we built it into our definition of done. And so we do get an opportunity to use that day in and day out.
Harold, do you have anything to add and give some insights?
Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I was listening to Dylan and also thinking about Wilson Model, because I read his profile on LinkedIn, and it's very good. Very good. I really like it. One thing that I captured.
You stalked him on LinkedIn and you approve.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I mean, the most important thing is to describe yourself. I mean, when you talk about your business, when you talk about what you're doing, you're talking about what you like, and you're talking about how you do it, or how you love your customers, you love your products, and you love your team. Those are things that I remember reading on your introduction on your LinkedIn profile. And definitely there are two things there. When you love your team and the connection is better, because today we were going to talk about collaboration, and I think we can learn more about your company, about what you're doing, and maybe, I'm sorry if I skip a few minutes at the beginning, but when we talk about this, we talk about leadership. And I like that when you say that as a leader, I love my team, I love my products, and from there we get together. Because maybe here's my comment and my question also. It's like, that's the way that you think, and that's amazing. I love that mindset as a leader. It's great. And the way that you translate it into working with your team should be like, I guess you're not a micromanager that are behind, but more like encouraging people for collaboration, for don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Let's try not to do mistakes, but we have creating like an environment in your team that can really support your customers with a competitive team. Is that the way that I'm getting well the way your mindset?
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, I think I agree with absolutely everything you just said. I've worked for a micromanager in the past, and it was soul crushing. I went from, like, at the transition of my previous manager to that person, I went from loving what I was doing to hating what I was doing. And it was basically the same stuff in a period of like 3 weeks. It was so demotivating. And one of the more exciting things that I've gotten to do throughout my career is work with insanely smart people. And when you watch those people, when they're in an environment that is fertile and you can kind of get their best work, it's so incredibly rewarding, right? It's just amazing to watch people do things that you don't have the capability of doing, or to have a certain amount of creativity that just sort of comes out of nowhere. It's very satisfying. It's satisfying for them. And then often it's kind of the right thing for the organization as well. So
Yeah, so you're not, and that's another thing that is very important. You're not afraid to work with people smarter than you. Smarter than you. I mean, you're the leader, you're leading, but you hire people that can be, as you said, insanely smarter. And
absolutely.
that is courage, but that is real leadership also, because if we think that we need to be preserving all the time our image as leaders, thinking how are we going to show up to the world, or what are they going to comment about what we do, how we are, that is not the right thing, not the right mindset, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean the best leaders, I mean they're just builders of teams, right? Like they're helping coordinate, and they're the keeper of the vision, right? They're reminding everybody why we're here and what we're building, and the why, versus having to be the smartest person in the room. I heard it described once as that, like, you know, being a founder at a small startup, you basically do every job reasonably okay, maybe even poorly, up until the point where you scale and you can hire somebody that's going to do the job really great. And then it's all about, you know, giving away your Legos and giving away your toys, and watching those people do so much better than you could have done yourself.
And
After the break, we can talk more about delegation and leadership, because it's funny how we were talking around leadership, but we didn't actually bring up the word. And there's so many different leadership styles and ways to lead. I've also had very tragic boss situations. I think, you know, people don't think about the fact that work is such a big part of your life, and that it can seep into, you know, how you feel about yourself personally if you have somebody who isn't you know, cooperating with what you need. And I like what you said, Dylan, about it being the same work. You know, the problem is not usually the work, it's you know, how communication is happening. Yeah, maybe a few quick thoughts on communication, and then we're going to pick up after the break talking about communication, maybe automation, you know, how they fit together. Either of you can go first.
I'm happy to, yeah. I mean, you guys had asked me to think a little bit about collaboration, and honestly, that was my number one that I sort of like jotted down before we had this conversation was, you know, communication, really, right? Like collaboration is all about communication. And I would say that one of the best strategies for clear communication is clear outcomes. Right. So when you talk to people about outcomes, you avoid that trap of like, this is exactly what I want you to do. And instead, you're talking about what you would like to see different in the world, right? Like what you would like to change. And that opens up a lot of the ability for people to have that creative feeling, to own what it is that they're doing. And there's a ton of tooling out there that can support this too. You know, we can dive into that after the break if we'd like to. But I mean, for me, I think it's clear outcomes.
I love that.
Yeah, it's always outcomes. You know, I always think about outcomes in terms of data collection, and that's something we haven't really dived into yet. But we also have the podcast bonus after this if you guys want to stick around for a few minutes. And so we still have time to cover those areas, and we've already had so many good insights from the two of you. So we will be back after the break.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Okay, welcome back, everybody, to DM Radio. I am sitting in for Eric. I'm Danielle Oberdier of Decayo Data, and I have Dylan and Harold still with me. We are going to start talking about automation and how working with machines can be beneficial, different, harder, easier than working with humans. So, Harold, you had some great thoughts during the break. Let's start with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Danielle. I really appreciate this conversation. It's amazing. And we were talking about leadership, about having a company, startup, and working hard for that. We were talking about the mindset of a leader versus the mindset of a micromanager. And just a quick comment that I am adding is that so many times we hear that employees do not leave companies, they leave bosses, that usually they are micromanagers, or they don't want you to grow. I mean, it's better for them to let you go out sometimes, even if they don't like it. So leadership is about collaboration. That is something else that we were talking about, collaboration, building a team. It's very important to love what you do. It's very important to love your products, your customers, but building that team in that environment when people can feel safe, even if they do mistakes, not on purpose. It's just doing mistakes because trying to grow, trying to be more, to innovate. And at the same time, when we're talking about leadership, collaboration, and collaboration tools, and customers and startups, we were talking about meaning. So important to have that sense of why we do things. And Dylan, you did a great comment there about saying how we do that, how we create, why we are doing this and for what. That is so very important for current new generations also. And Danielle, you were saying that the other ingredient that we need to add also is communication. Communication and the way that we communicate each other in a team, in an organization is key for a successful team. So now, and I think before we start with automation, that is a topic that on this segment, these are the challenges that so many organizations have, that they don't believe that much or that this is important, and some others, yes, and they invest time and effort and resources for training, developing leaders, and develop a very knowledgeable, I would say, sharing knowledge and creating a very strong knowledge environment where everybody can share and everybody can learn and grow. So it's more about collaboration skills also to learn and to do the work. But now that when we get into automation, there are two things that we need to consider. Many times we talk about the future of work. The future of work is a very nice concept. We talk about diversity, we talk about flexibility, we talk about inclusion. Those are very important things to consider. We talk about wellness. That's something very important also in this new concept of the future of work. But there is no future of work. There is no digital transformation without automation. When we talk about automation, we need to talk about processes that we do, maybe using computer, maybe using Excel, maybe using Word, maybe using other systems, but that we can redesign that process for automation, to automate the process. It's not necessarily, and I want to hear your thoughts about automation, Dylan, also, it's not just replicating the process, the business process out in the way that we are doing it right now. It's more to improve that process and to go through automation. What's your take? What's your thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's so much to automation. There's so many opportunities with automation. I think first off, when I think about this idea of like communication, automation can be a way to agree on the way in which we work. So for instance, if I'm talking about something very practical, that like a commit message needs to have an issue key reference, right? You can use automation to say that we're not going to allow commits that don't have that sort of layout, right? It sounds really simple, but it goes a little bit deeper. It says that as an organization, when we work together, we want to know that we are working on something that has, some detail and some specification. And so that the person who comes a year later and needs to fix a bug has context so that they can understand like why we were doing the things that we were doing, what was motivating that, right? And that is a way of saying that is a very human thing to do. You're saying, I want to level set how we are working together. And then I'm going to use automation to help enforce that. A lot of the things that we do in Sleuth are around that. It's taking that developer process, the developer flow, and saying the best teams do these things and have relied on these cultural norms and checks. And we can add those to your system for you, right? And it's one of these things where it's not just it's not just the check itself. It's the process behind it, and automating that, adding that automation, I think builds a culture. So it's not just like a robot thing.
Absolutely.
I would love to weigh in on that because I completely agree. I think, people I never was afraid of machines replacing people. I just know too much about work for that. But I think now people are starting to realize that, you can give machines the tasks that they can handle. And then I do believe, maybe I have too much faith in humanity, but I do believe that once our kind of base is covered, we grow, people want to do the next step. And so we'll just have more capabilities once the machines take over things that are tying us up. And I think also I've personally learned a lot from learning machine learning, because the processes, like you said, Harold, the processes that are needed for machine learning can be beneficial to us. I mean, I'm not saying I'm making a test set of my eye makeup when I wake up. It's not that deep. It's just that the whole, setting aside time for testing, for validating, and then for deploying, it makes sense, not just to machines, but to us. And so I think that the way machines work can inform us, and we inform them with what you said, Dylan, about the tasks that you already do and you do repeatedly. How can we have the machines do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key to removing toil in developers' lives in general, is that when you find yourself saying, we always do, or you need to check every time, right? There should be a little light bulb going off in your head that says, that's probably somebody else's job, that's a robot's job. And it's something that we've agreed upon, and humans are squishy. It's hard to remember every time. Working by convention is difficult, but building in place the scaffolding and the safety nets that you need to work the way you want, that automation can be great for that.
Harold, go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, there is something that is always important when you're going to implement some change in a company. You must make sure that you start with the culture. We start with understanding why you're doing this and for what, and not just to say, I'm going to implement automation, or I'm going to implement some bots in the organization because this is a trend. We need to make sure that we are customizing to the needs. Mm-hmm. And most of the companies, most of the organizations nowadays, most of the companies are becoming somehow technology companies, because
everybody is. Yeah.
Everybody is. I mean, everything we do now is with technology. Now, just a quick comment about what you mentioned, Danielle. Also, when we go to machine learning, we go to automation. That is important. Many people is afraid, thinking that, and we receive a lot of questions and comments about this online, saying that, we are going to be replaced by machines. And we are now, and particularly the last few months, we are learning more that we are in a huge turn right now, a huge change. The change that we are experiencing is huge, and it's going to change a lot, everything. Education, job skills, every industry is impacted with all the changes that we see with artificial intelligence. Now, when we talk, 2 weeks ago, I was in a university here in Florida, and they invited me to discuss about artificial intelligence and new jobs and the new job market. And people, the students were very concerned about that, because they're looking for jobs and say, how are we going to fit in the new market, in the new marketplace? And the summary was that we need to learn more skills because the machines are not going to be replacing the jobs, but people who knows artificial intelligence will do that.